It was supposed to be a harmless joke, a love letter I would never send. But somehow, fate decided to slip it out of my trembling hands and place it into the mailbox of the one person I should never have written about. The night it happened, I was just another invisible student in a small town in Ohio, a nobody who spent too much time scribbling secret feelings into notebooks I swore no one would ever read. My words weren't meant for the world, much less for someone so untouchable, so dazzling that he felt like a myth. Yet, there I was standing in the cold, realizing that my heart had just been shipped away in a white envelope sealed with my biggest mistake. I never thought he would read it. I never thought he would even notice me. But when his reply came, neatly folded and carrying the weight of a prince's attention, my world began to crumble and rebuild in ways I couldn't control. It all started with him, Adrien Lancaster. You didn't need to live in Ohio to know his name. He was the kind of man whose face showed up in magazines, whispered about in headlines, someone too grand for our small-town lives. He belonged to a family with old money, a dynasty with ties stretching from coast to coast. Adrien wasn't just rich. He was untouchably magnetic, a figure painted in light and shadow, both admired and envied. And me? I was nobody. Ethan Carter, 19 years old, library clerk, part-time community college student, full-time dreamer. My life was a blur of routine. Shelving books, attending lectures, eating instant ramen in my tiny rented apartment, and pretending that someday I might escape the gravity of my ordinariness. I wrote letter sunriad confessions that filled my desk drawer. They were my therapy, a way of whispering into the void. Until one letter slipped through. That night, I had been tired, distracted, carrying envelopes I intended to drop in the campus mailbox applications. Forms, the boring debris of student life. My letter to Adrien, the one written in a reckless haze of longing, had somehow joined the pile. I realized it too late. The following days were torture. Every time my phone buzzed, every time the mail truck passed by, I felt my chest tighten. But still, I told myself, he won't notice, he'll laugh, he'll toss it away. That's all. Then came the impossible. The letter arrived back in my mailbox, tucked inside a navy blue envelope with his family's crest pressed in gold. I stared at it for hours before daring to open it. My fingers shook as if I were holding a bomb, and in a way inside was not scorn, not silence, not rejection, but words. His words. You don't know me, and yet your words reached places most people never even try. Tell me, Ethan, was this truly a mistake? Or are you brave enough to stand by what your heart confessed? I almost dropped the page. My knees weakened. My pulse thundered so loudly I thought my neighbors might hear it. He had not only read, it had answered. And worse, he knew my name. That night, sleep abandoned me. I walked in circles around my room, clutching the letter to my chest, half ready to burn it, half ready to frame it. By dawn, I was still awake, my thoughts tangled between fear and impossible hope. Adrien Lancaster wasn't someone who just noticed people. He wasn't the kind of man you met at a grocery store or sat next to on a bus. He was unreachable, always photographed stepping out of black cars, surrounded by bodyguards, existing in a world lit by chandeliers and glass towers. And now he knew I existed. The letters became more frequent. Each reply from him felt like pulling oxygen into lungs that had never breathed before. He was sharp, teasing, sometimes maddeningly cryptic. But between his words, I felt something I couldn't explain: curiosity, warmth, a thread pulling us closer. Until one night he wrote, "I am coming to Ohio." I dropped the letter as though it had bitten me. He was coming here? To this town where the most exciting event of the year was the county fair? My mind spun with images I couldn't control. Him, in his tailored coats and polished shoes, walking down our cracked sidewalks. Him, stepping into my library where dust coated the shelves. Him, standing in front of Menet as an idea, not as a distant dream, but real, and terrifyingly close. The day he arrived, the entire town knew. Black cars lined the street, strangers in suits hovered on corners, and the local diner nearly collapsed under the weight of gossip. I stood behind the library counter, trying to pretend I wasn't shaking, when the bell above the door chimed. There he was, Adrien Lancaster in the flesh, taller than I expected, his presence filling the room as if gravity bent toward him. His dark hair caught the light, his gray eyes swept across the room, sharp but softened when they landed on me. My lungs forgot their job. "Ethan Carter," he said, his voice rich and steady, like the first notes of a song you knew would change you. "You've kept me waiting." I stammered something, anything but words failed me. The library around us blurred, sounds muffled, until it was just him and me in that fragile silence. "Why?" I whispered, finally finding breath. "Why are you here?" His lips curved, not quite a smile, more like a secret he wasn't ready to share. "Because you wrote to me, and I couldn't stop reading." The days that followed felt unreal, like living inside someone else's story. Adrien wasn't what I expected. He was worse and better all at once. Arrogant, yes, but disarmingly human. He asked questions no one else had ever cared to ask. He listened with a focus that made me tremble. He teased me until my cheeks burned, but beneath it all, there was a gentleness that scared me more than his wealth or his fame. But the town didn't see gentleness. They saw scandal. Whispers followed us down streets, eyes lingered too long, and suddenly I was no longer invisible. I was the boy who caught Adrien Lancaster's attention, the boy rumored to be chasing after money, the boy foolish enough to believe in something impossible. And yet when he touched my hand under the table at the diner, when he looked at me as though I was the only person in the room, I didn't care. For the first time in my life I felt seen. But I also knew, stories like mine didn't end happily. Not for people like me. That night, as I lay in bed, his words echoed in my mind. "You've kept me waiting." Waiting for what? For me to be brave enough? For me to risk everything? I didn't know. But I did know one thing: Adrien Lancaster wasn't leaving. Not yet. And my heart was already too far gone to turn back. The first week of Adrien's arrival blurred into something like a fever dream. He wasn't hiding. Not in the slightest. He walked the streets of my town as if he belonged here, shaking hands with the mayor, eating pancakes at the diner, pausing in front of flower shops as though he was simply another visitor passing through. Except he wasn't just another visitor, and everyone knew it. His presence rippled through the air, unsettling routines, stirring whispers, turning quiet lives into chatter. But every time his eyes found mine across a crowded space, the world stilled. He didn't need to say much. His silence was louder than the gossip. I would be shelving books in the library and suddenly he'd appear between the aisles, tall and composed, his hand brushing against mine as if by accident. He'd linger by the counter, pretending to ask about local history but really just watching me struggle to keep my hands steady. Terrified me, and it thrilled me. One evening, as I locked up the library, he was waiting outside. No entourage, no polished armor of wealth, just Adrien leaning against the lamppost, the glow painting his face in shadows and light. "You walk home, don't you?" he asked casually, as though he'd known me for years. My throat went dry. "Most people do around here." He smirked, tilting his head. "Then let me join you." I should have said no. I should have refused, should have remembered all the reasons this was impossible. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself walking beside him down cracked sidewalks, our breaths fogging the cool night air. For a while, neither of us spoke. The town stretched quiet around us, broken only by the hum of a passing car. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Do you regret it?" I stopped. Regret what? The letter. His voice was low, not accusing but curious. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt. My chest tightened as I searched his face. I never meant for you to see it. That's not what I asked. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to laugh it off, to pretend it had all been a childish mistake. But something in his gaze pinned me still steady, unflinching, demanding truth. "No," I whispered finally. "I don't regret it." His lips curved, not into a mocking grin, not into some princely smirk, but into something softer, something almost fragile. "Good." And then, without warning, he brushed his hand against mine. Just enough for me to feel the heat, just enough to ignite something dangerous inside me. The town didn't take long to notice. By the second week, I couldn't step into the grocery store without people staring. Mrs. Hayward, who usually asked me about my mother, suddenly avoided my eyes. The cashier lingered with my change a moment too long, as if wondering what it felt like to touch the boy who'd somehow caught Adrien Lancaster's attention. It hurt more than I expected. I had lived invisible for so long, and now that I was seen, it was through a distorted lens of suspicion and envy. The walls of the town that once felt safe began to close in on me. Adrien, however, seemed immune. He didn't flinch at the whispers, didn't retreat behind tinted windows or bodyguards. If anything, he leaned closer. He invited me to sit with him at the diner, ignoring the stares. He followed me into the farmer's market, teasing me over fruit choices. At night, he wrote me letters still. Long ones, sometimes pages thick, where his polished words gave way to something rawer, hungrier. You make me remember what it feels like to want without calculation. Or, I've stood in rooms filled with people and felt alone, but when you look at me, I feel seen. I read those letters until my hands ached, until my chest felt too small to contain the storm he stirred inside me. And yet, fear shadowed every moment. The breaking point came at the church fundraiser. It was the kind of event my town thrived on: tables of pies, kids running around with raffle tickets, volunteers selling jars of homemade jam. I was supposed to help with the book stall, arranging donated paperbacks in neat rows. But when Adrien walked in, everything froze. He didn't belong there, not among peeling paint and styrofoam cups of punch. And yet he moved through the crowd like he owned it, smiling politely, shaking hands. People pretended to welcome him, but their eyes slid toward me, sharp and cutting. I tried to disappear into the books to make myself small. But of course he found me. Which one would you recommend? His voice cut through the murmur, drawing every eye in the room. I glanced at the books, desperate. That depends. Do you like mysteries? I like challenges, he replied smoothly, his gaze locked on mine. Heat rushed to my face. I heard the whispers rising, the disapproval thick in the air. And then, as if the world wasn't already collapsing around me, he reached out, picked up a worn copy of The Great Gatsby, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I'll take this one, because you remind me of him." My breath caught. Of Gatsby? No, he said softly, leaning closer. Of the narrator. The one who notices everything but doesn't realize he's the heart of the story. For a moment, the room disappeared. It was just his voice, his eyes, the impossible pull between us. But then I heard it, someone muttering near the pie table, sharp enough to slice through the haze. Disgraceful. What's he doing with that boy? The words struck harder than I expected. My stomach twisted, shame and rage colliding. Adrien's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, I bolted. I ran out of the hall, past the tables, past the glares, until the cold night air bit at my lungs. I stopped by the church steps, gripping the railing until my knuckles turned white. Moments later, he was there. "Ethan, don't." My voice cracked, raw. "Don't follow me. You don't understand." He stared at me, silent. "You get to leave." I spat, my chest heaving. "You'll go back to your world, and this town will go back to hating me. I'll be the fool who thought this could mean anything." The words burned as they left me, but I couldn't stop. The fear, the shame, the crushing weight of expectation, I spilled it all under the harsh glow of the street lamp. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, quietly, he stepped closer. "You think I came here for fun?" His voice was sharper now, edged with something I hadn't heard before. "You think I crossed miles, left everything behind, just to play games?" I couldn't meet his eyes. His hand reached out, steady, unwavering. He tilted my chin up, forcing me to face him. "I came here because your words undid me, because you made me feel human again. And I'm not leaving you behind, Ethan. Not now. Not ever." My vision blurred. The world wavered, and suddenly, I couldn't tell if I wanted to collapse into him or run further away. But his grip was gentle, his eyes fierce, and for the first time, I believed him. That night I couldn't sleep. His words replayed over and over, battling the fear that gnawed at my gut. Could I trust him? Could I believe that someone like Adrien Lancaster would fight for someone like me? The answer should have been obvious. And yet, when dawn broke, I found myself writing another letter, this one not of longing, not of fantasy, but of raw truth. If you mean it, if you truly mean to stay, then you have to prove it. Not to them. To me. I left it in his hotel mailbox before I could change my mind. When I returned home that evening, there he was, leaning against my apartment door, and in his hand-me letter, folded and worn. I don't need to prove myself to them, he said, his voice quiet but unshakable. But to you, I'll spend my life doing it. The letter had been my challenge, and Adrien had answered it with his presence at my door. That night, when he stood outside my apartment holding my words in his hand, something inside me shifted. For all the doubts, for all the fear clawing at my ribs, the fire in his eyes left no room for disbelief. He meant it, but meaning it and surviving it were two different things. We started meeting in places where the world couldn't easily follow, quiet stretches of the riverbank, empty classrooms after hours, the far end of the library's basement where the oldest archives gathered dust. He'd lean back against the shelves, hands in his pockets, watching me as though every movement I made was worth memorizing. I'd pretend to read from a book just so I wouldn't crumble under the intensity of his gaze. "You're still afraid," he said one evening, breaking the silence. I looked up, startled. "Of course I am." "Why?" "Because this doesn't happen to people like me," I admitted, my voice cracking. "Because everyone's waiting for me to fail, for you to get bored, for this to collapse." He pushed off the shelves, stepping close. "Ethan, I'm not a storm passing through. I'm here." And when his hand found mine, I believed him, at least for that moment. Still, the town didn't make it easy. Rumors thickened like smoke. I caught fragments everywhere, at the diner, in the library, walking home. "Gold digger. It's just a phase for him. That boy doesn't know what he's playing with." Each word lodged in me like glass splinters. Adrien heard them too. I knew he did, but his reaction was infuriating. He ignored them. He kept walking with his head high, kept looking at me like I was worth every whisper. But I wasn't built like him. My skin wasn't armor. The breaking point came when my landlord pulled me aside, his face tight. "Ethan, I don't care what you do with your life, but people talk. I don't want trouble with the other tenants." I stood frozen, shame burning hot under my skin. Trouble. That was what I'd become, Simeon's problem. That night, I told Adrien I couldn't keep doing this. We were sitting by the river, the moon cutting silver across the water. "I can't be the reason people look at me and see trash," I said, my voice brittle. "I can't live like this." He was silent for a long time. Then he whispered, "So what do you want me to do? Leave? Walk away and pretend none of this mattered?" I couldn't answer. My silence was the only answer he needed. He stood, furious and wounded. "You don't get it, do you? I came here for you. I put myself in their crosshairs because of you. And you'd rather believe them than believe me. Because I'm the one who has to live here when you're gone." I snapped, my throat raw. "Because when this ends, and it won't break you. It'll destroy me." His face hardened, his jaw tight. For the first time, I saw the prince in him, not as charming but as terrifying, unyielding, dangerous in his certainty. "Maybe," he said coldly, "you don't deserve what I'm offering." He walked away, his figure swallowed by the night, and I sat there shaking, my chest hollowed out. The days that followed were unbearable. No letters, no visits, no unexpected appearances in the library aisles. Adrien Lancaster was gone, and though the town quieted, the silence inside me roared. I tried to return to my routines. Books, classes, the loneliness I knew too well. But nothing fit the same way anymore. I'd tasted something rare, something that made my small life burn brighter, and now the absence of it was suffocating. Everywhere I turned, I saw him, his shadow in the glass doors of the library, his voice in the rustle of pages, his hand brushing mine in memory, until one afternoon, I found an envelope waiting in my mailbox. My heart lurched. It wasn't his crest this time, not the elegant stationery. Just plain paper, folded roughly, my name scrawled across the front in hurried ink. Inside were only a few lines. I will not beg for your trust, but when you decide you're ready to stop running, you know where to find me. It was unsigned. It didn't need to be. I tried to ignore it. I tried to bury myself in work, in the rhythm of sorting books, in the monotony of everyday life. But every time the bell above the library door rang, I half expected him to walk in. Days stretched into weeks and still I held back, until the town gave me no choice. It was late evening, and I was locking up the library when I heard them 3 boys leaning against the wall, their laughter sharp and cruel. "Where's your prince, Carter? Finally realized you're not worth it." I stiffened, fumbling with my keys. One of them stepped closer. "Thought you could climb your way out of here, didn't you? Thought you'd matter because someone shiny looked at you." My throat closed. I tried to push past, but he shoved me back against the wall. "Pathetic," he spat. "He's gone, and you're nothing. Always were. I don't know what I would have done if a voice hadn't cut through the air. Touch him again, and you'll regret breathing." I looked up. Adrien. He stood there like he'd stepped out of my desperate prayers, his eyes blazing, his voice low and lethal. The boys faltered, muttered curses, and scattered into the night. Adrien didn't move toward me right away. He just stood there, chest rising and falling, anger radiating off him like heat. Finally, he spoke. "This is why I stayed. Because I knew they'd eat you alive." My voice cracked. "Then why did you leave me?" His expression softened instantly, the fire in his eyes dimming into something else. "Because you told me to." The silence between us was thick, trembling with everything unsaid. Then slowly I stepped forward. "I was afraid," I admitted. "I still am. But I don't want to live like this, running, hiding, pretending I don't care. I do care. Too much." Something in him broke then. His shoulders eased. His face crumpled with relief and longing. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands cupping my face. "Then don't run anymore." And before I could answer, his lips were on mine, fierce, desperate, claiming. The world disappeared. The weight of the town, the whispers, the fear all burned away in the fire of that kiss. We spent the night talking in my apartment, words spilling between kisses, laughter breaking through the heaviness. He told me about his world, the pressure, the expectations, the loneliness that followed him no matter how many people surrounded him. And I told him about mine, about invisibility, about wanting to be more but never daring, about how one mistake, one misplaced letter, had become the only thing in my life that felt like destiny. "I don't know how this ends," I whispered, tracing the line of his jaw. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But for once, I don't care. I just want it to keep going." For the first time, I let myself believe it could. But the world doesn't pause for love. The next morning, headlines exploded. Someone had photographed Yusin the church steps by the river outside the library. Grainy pictures splashed across news feeds, tagged with Adrien's name, dissected by strangers who didn't know either of us. By noon, reporters were circling the town. By evening, the mayor was calling for discretion. And by nightfall, I realized our fragile sanctuary had been shattered. Adrien was no longer just the man who leaned across library shelves to touch my hand. He was back to being the prince. And I was the scandal attached to him. The night stretched endlessly, yet everything felt fragile, balanced on the trembling edges of words unsaid. I should have been relieved after all the confessions, after everything we had dragged into the open. But relief wasn't the right word. It was more like being cracked wide, like someone had finally cut through my chest, and now the air was sharp against raw skin. I stood there, still trembling, while Professor, my impossible love, looked at me with a softness I had never seen before. His hands hovered, uncertain, as if he was trying to memorize the exact distance between us before it disappeared forever. "I don't want to be your mistake," I whispered. My voice was too thin to fill the room, but I knew he heard. "And I don't want you to carry guilt for the rest of your life just because of me." His jaw tightened, but his eyes, God, his eyes, they weren't cold anymore. They weren't distant. They burned with something so raw that I almost couldn't meet them. "You are not a mistake," he said finally, each word deliberate, cutting through the silence. "You were never a mistake." The floor tilted beneath me, like the weight of those words alone could pull me apart. I wanted to believe him, desperately, but believing meant handing him the last shards of myself, and if he dropped them, I wasn't sure I'd survive. "Then why do you always push me away?" My voice cracked. "Why do you act like I don't matter when I can't stop?" I broke off, choking on my own sob. Something inside him seemed to fracture at that sound. He closed the space between us in 2 decisive steps, his hand finally catching mine. His grip was warm, steady, and terrifyingly real. "Because if I let myself," his breath trembled, breaking the precision of his words. "If I let myself feel everything I want to feel about you, I wouldn't be able to stop. And you deserve someone who isn't trapped by rules, by fear, by consequences." I shook my head violently, tears stinging my cheeks. "I don't care about rules. I don't care about consequences. My voice faltered, but I forced it out. "I just care about you." For a heartbeat, he simply looked at me. No words, no walls, no professor and student. Just 2 people standing in the middle of everything that could ruin them, too close to turn back. Then he pulled me into him. It wasn't tentative, wasn't careful. It was desperate, like something he'd been holding back for far too long had finally snapped. My face pressed against his chest, and I felt the tremor in his body, the racing of his heartbeat under my ear. I tried so hard not to. His voice was ragged, muffled in my hair. "But I can't anymore. Do you understand? I can't." The tears came harder, but this time they weren't only from pain. They were from release, from finally hearing the words I thought I'd never get. I clung to him, my hands fisting in his shirt. "Then don't stop. Please, don't stop." His arms tightened around me like he could shield me from the entire world. And maybe, for that moment, he did. The days that followed were like walking through fire and rain at the same time. We never spoke of labels. We never dared to call it what it was, not out loud. But the truth lived in the quiet glances, in the way his hand brushed mine when no one was looking, in the way he lingered just a second too long when handing back my graded essays. Every risk felt unbearable, but every stolen moment felt like oxygen. I had thought loving him would always mean pain, but now I understood it could mean survival too. One evening, near the end of the semester, I found myself in his office again. The bookshelves towered, the papers cluttered, but his presence made the room feel impossibly small. He sat across from me, silent, as though fighting a war inside his own chest. I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to say the things that ached at the tip of my tongue. But the world outside those walls still existed, full of judgment and rules and consequences. Finally, he broke the silence. "After this semester ends, things will change." The words nearly hollowed me out. "Change how?" His gaze locked onto mine, steady and unwavering. "I won't be your professor anymore." My breath caught. Hope and fear crashed violently together. "So what are you saying?" He leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk, his expression unguarded for once. "I'm saying, when that day comes, I won't hold back anymore." The world spun dizzy around me, but this time it wasn't from despair. It was from the sudden, terrifying brightness of possibility. I wanted to laugh, cry, scream, anything to let out the storm building in my chest. But instead, I whispered, "Then I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes." For the first time, his lips curved not in the cold, polite smile I'd seen in class, but in something real, something almost tender. "I hope you don't have to wait too long," he said softly. The semester ended. The final paper was turned in. The final grade posted. The final barrier between professor and student dissolved quietly, like it had never been there at all. And one evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and the campus emptied into silence, he found me waiting under the old oak tree by the library. No pretense, no distance, just him and me. He walked toward me slowly, the weight of years and fear and restraint falling away with each step. And when he finally stood in front of me, his hand found mine without hesitation. No words were needed, not anymore, because in that moment, I knew every tear, every ache, every night I thought I was breaking had led me here, to him, to us, and for the first time I wasn't afraid. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.